In this episode of Dil Se, we're going to talk about India's foreign policy. We are supposed to be the Vish Guru of the world. Experts believe that our foreign policy, or any country's foreign policy, depends a lot on the economic power that the country has. And on the basis of that, you get muscle power in foreign policy. And a lot of experts have tied up the domestic issues that are happening in any country with its foreign policy postures. We're going to discuss these issues today with two of perhaps the most prominent, accomplished foreign service officers in this country. Shri Shyam Saran, who has been our foreign secretary for 2 years, from 2004 to 2006. He's been our ambassador to China. He's been the Sherpa of the government to the G8 plus G5 countries. He's been the chief negotiator in climate change issues. And of course, he knows this part of the world, that is our neighborhood, exceptionally well. And we have another accomplished officer, foreign service officer, Navtej Sarna, who was our ambassador to the United States from 2016 to 2018. He's been a High Commissioner to the UK. He was an ambassador to Israel. And he knows, he's fully accomplished in all kinds of global issues. Apart from that, he's a prolific writer. He's written books of fiction. He's written translated books. And I think he's published about 10 books. So let's start this conversation. Are we a Vish Guru?
It depends on what definition you have of the Vish Guru. I don't think there is any doubt that at this particular point of time, India is in some kind of a global sweet spot for various reasons. It is a country which in a global economy which is not really growing very much. The previous engine of global growth, which is China, as you know, has been slowing down, is facing its own economic headwinds. So if you look at India's economic performance over the last several years, I think it would be fair to say that even with a growth rate of about 6 to 7%, it sort of stands out amongst
some doubt that growth rate
others.
number.
Well, that's a matter of
Because you've changed the basis, no? From 2004-5 to 2011-12.
True, but I would still say, even if there are some doubts about what the exact rate of growth is, there is no doubt that India is one of the faster growing emerging economies. Maybe you wouldn't want to say fastest, but it is certainly one of the faster ones.
No, I'm looking at it from slightly differently. You're right. I think we're in a sweet spot. I think we have great opportunities. But a Vish Guru is one who influences policies around the world.
Yes.
Right? And I don't think that that can happen unless you are a big economic power, as China has shown. Right?
Yes.
So in that sense, you're right. I think Indian economy has done perhaps better than many other economies. But that's also because of our growing population. Remember?
True.
Yes, right.
True.
So to that extent, you're right.
Let me just try and explain myself. Even if the size of the Indian economy is not very large, and it is not growing at the rate that China was growing, I think the difference in terms of geopolitics and what is the nature of India's influence, I think you are today again seen, as you were perhaps during the earlier period 2003 to 2007, as a country which was beginning to catch up with China. So it was reducing that gap between the two countries. Then that stopped. In fact, the gap started expanding again.
Right.
I think today reason why you are being looked at perhaps in a different perspective and a more positive perspective is because once again you are seen as reducing that gap. And that is giving you a larger diplomatic space. So, in terms of influence, if not Vish Guru, not showing the way to others, but I think it would be fair to say that both for reasons of economy and secondly, because of the fact that today, as far as the major powers are concerned, the United States of America, Western Europe, for them, the greatest challenge is in fact China.
No doubt about it.
And in that context, which is the country which has the scale,
Right.
which is the country which has modest maybe at still, but has significant scientific and technological capabilities. And in terms of muscle power that you said, there is no doubt that our military strength is, relatively speaking, also growing.
Certainly.
So for
Without
these reasons, I think geopolitically, if you play your cards well, then I think India can, in fact, advance its position in the geopolitics.
I'll take this conversation forward, but I'd want to hear Navtej on this.
No, I think exactly what Ambassador Shyam Saran said, if I can come at it from a slightly different angle, I think there are three factors, more or less. One is our geography, one is our demography, and one is our economy.
Right.
If not in actual achievement, in its potential.
Correct.
And its scale.
Right.
And given the conflicting position that's the chaos in the world at the moment, it's really every man for himself. And I think the world is coming away from any kind of rule-based order or international liberal post-war order and all those things we used to talk about into naked geopolitical rivalries. And in that, we find ourselves in a place where we are able to do, if for want of another word, a kind of arbitrage. So we are trying to maximize our good relations with several countries and are to either to brace ourselves against a rising China or manage our maximum advantages from them. For instance, the United States. Now, our relationship with the United States has consistently grown over the last 30 years. Today, there is, in addition to our inherent strategic convergence, there is a kind of shared
Vision.
perception about China.
Right.
4 years ago, 5 years ago, perhaps before Galwan, certainly we were not quite on the same wicket, which explained why we were going slow in the Quad.
Right.
Today, there is that strategic convergence. It may last, it may not last. But the basic ballast of the relationship should have been built up enough. Similarly, we have these, we are triangulating various equations. You have Russia, US, India. You have India, US, China. And now, of course, the Middle East is opening up in a very different way. So I think it is a sweet spot. But ultimately, the test of the sweet spot should be how much good it does, from where you started, how much good does it do to our own people?
That's correct. Now, let me sort of, on that, start a fresh conversation. You said that we're in a sweet spot, right? The gap between India and China is being reduced, right? But it's not being reduced because of the enormous, let us say, upswing in our economic fortunes. It's the enormous downswing in the fortunes of China. China is growing, as you know now, at the rate of 5.6%.
Yeah, 5.4.
5.6% or whatever. China's real estate market is in dumps, deep dumps. 70% of the assets of people in China are in real estate. There's a 40% fall in the value of that, right? And the market has gone down 60%. This is what's happening in China. So China, therefore, is softening its position even towards Taiwan and even towards the US. So it is not so much that we are closing the gap, it is the fortuitous circumstance of the fall of the Chinese economy right? And actually the bond market, they have defaulted in the bond market. So it is really the downturn in the Chinese economy that has resulted in the narrowing of the gap. That's number one. Number two, the sweet spot is because of the fact that China became a power to be reckoned with. And therefore, the United States and the Western world realized that they can't make all their investments in China. They were looking for an alternative, and the only alternative is India, which has huge possibilities. So the sweet spot is because of circumstances. The narrowing of the gap is because of the decline of the Chinese economy. I'm not saying that we're not in a sweet spot, but I don't think it is because of our own making that this has happened, but we should take advantage of this, right? This is my
well, up to a point, I agree with you that partly it is because of the relative positions have undergone some change. And that is why India is being looked at in a somewhat different perspective than before. But I would still say that if you look around the world, and particularly if you look around the emerging economies, there is no doubt that over a period of time, India has maintained a reasonably high rate of growth of about 6 to 7%. You might quibble about the exact percentage.
I don't want to quibble.
But I think it is fair to say that you have maintained a certain decent rate of growth. But more importantly, Navtej referred to, the kind of turmoil which you see around the world. The fact that we may be in that transition period between one global order and another global order. Now, in that kind of a situation where there is tremendous, wherever you look around, even within the United States, America itself, you see that there is political uncertainty. Now, you may not like the present political dispensation in India. There are doubts about which way this dispensation is going. But I think it would be fair to say that whatever the nature of the dispensation, it has managed to provide in this period of great turmoil and change, everywhere around us, a certain kind of political stability which has become quite rare.
No, not only that, we have been able to, in a sense, have our presence felt in the world.
Right.
Let's put it in terms of perception.
Yes. So the perception.
I don't think we should doubt that.
So the perception outside is that where everywhere is uncertainty, there is change taking place, and you don't know how that change is going to express itself. Here is a country which is a large player. It may not be the greatest player, but it is a large player. It has demonstrated a kind of political stability which is rather rare in the rest of the world. So if you take these two factors together, I think that explains why you are seeing not only potential, but a country which is in some sense realizing some of that potential.
Navtej?
No, absolutely. And actually, there are certain objective things which have happened over the years. And one of them is a slowly bettering of the climate for investment. So, I mean, it's not, we are not all there at the moment.
Right.
But still, you find a fair amount of infrastructural improvement, etc., which is encouraging countries to come. The second thing, again, perhaps, again, is fortuitous, but again, I think we should be taking advantage of it, and hopefully we are, was what happened to China during COVID. What the world realized that they had put too many eggs in the China basket.
Right.
There was a kind of watering down of the trust of China. This matched with Xi's very aggressive and robust kind of reactions all along their areas of particular interest. Now, when you put these two things together, a lot of corporates which had put everything into China are looking to move away.
Right.
They are trying. Vietnam has been a great beneficiary of that.
That's right.
But now what from people are saying is that Vietnam has reached its limits. Vietnam does not have the kind of scale that they need. So India has, and some things are moving. this way. So again, we call it fortuitous, but then, that's the way
That's what
life is.
That's
a lot of things come your way, and you have to be ready to.
When history
to
gives you
take
those
it.
opportunities,
Yes,
you have to.
and that has happened, and that because of that, and because of essentially China's threat has become so high to the United States as a major competitor in every field, whether it is in the maritime world, whether it is in trade, whether it is in an alternative worldview, whether it is in emerging technologies, there is a battle on between what the future of the world is going to look like. There are two alternative viewpoints, worldviews emerging.
That's correct.
And India at the moment has the potential and the capability to be an important partner of this, a worldview which safeguards its own securities.
You're absolutely right, and I agree with you. We can have a different debate on the economy, where you said, no, the GDP, the numbers, the growth, the infrastructure, who is benefiting. I mean, I think you're right that the growth is there, but I call it the creamy layer growth.
Yeah,
could be.
Right? Yeah. And it's not the kind of growth that is in fact trickling down. India's poverty levels, in fact, are pretty dismal. Our per capita income, even amongst the BRICS countries, is the lowest. So we can't tom-tom about economic growth in the context of equity. But that's a separate discussion. I don't want to enter into that. But let's look at our neighborhood. Where we were in 2014, I remember at the inauguration, our neighbors came. Where are we now? China, because of its overpowering presence on the borders, its occupation of almost 4 lakh kilometers of our area, it's our somewhat deteriorated relations with Nepal, our recent domestic policies, right, are impacting our foreign relations. That's the point I started with. And so where are we? Where we were in 2014, now where are we today amongst our neighbors? It's a very disturbing situation, if you ask me.
So the good news is that I think whether it was the previous government or the current government recognized that the priority in our foreign policy has to be the neighborhood.
Correct.
If you can't get your neighborhood right, much else that you want to pursue will not be.
There was a famous saying called "Love thy neighbor." It applies only. It doesn't apply in foreign policy.
No, it does not necessarily apply in foreign policy.
It's
but
a different definition of love.
But it is certainly true that I think that recognition has been there before, and it has continued with this government as well. But the neighborhood is complicated. There is no doubt about that. I think one of the things that you mentioned which is very important, is the impact of domestic politics on foreign policy. Now, let me say that domestic politics will always impact on foreign policy.
It does.
And yet, I think the important distinction is that you must not use foreign policy to influence domestic politics.
That's correct.
So that equation is unavoidable, right, but the other part is avoidable.
Right.
And I think in one sense, that distinction has got somewhat blurred. That is, you play foreign policy so that you can influence what may be
domestic politics.
That is not an optimal way of pursuing foreign policy. So that is one challenge I think we have. Second challenge is that even though we say neighborhood first, the problem all along has been that has not been translated into what you actually deploy in terms of resources, in terms of even diplomatic manpower.
Correct.
To nurture these relationships. Right. And these relationships are of a nature which cannot be pursued only at the official level.
That's right.
Or at the top level.
People to people.
People to people is very important, but at the same time, at every level, whether it is the parliaments, whether it is, bureaucracy.
Institutional.
Yes,
camaraderie.
at
Business.
every level you have to pursue these relationships and nurture these relationships. What has happened, if you look at the history of our relationship with our neighbors, mostly it is episodic.
Right.
If a crisis occurs,
Deal
we are
with
all
it.
there.
Yes.
Crisis diminishes, again it starts being put on the shelf.
Correct.
So this is a structural issue,
Yes.
and it needs to be addressed. So part of the reason why I think today we see that the neighborhood policy is not really delivering what it should, with a few exceptions. We have done very well with Bangladesh, no doubt about that. We have continued to do rather well with Bhutan. And let me also say, which you mentioned, that China has made inroads into our neighborhood. That is certainly true. Obviously, we cannot match the resources that China is able to bring to the table. We cannot do the same. But it is a mug's game to try and always try to catch up with China in that
I
respect.
agree, I
So you have assets which China does not have. You mentioned people-to-people relationship. You see the kind of strong cultural affinity which exists between our neighbors and ourselves. And I think what we have not been able to do is to really translate that very density of people-to-people relations into a political asset, in dealing with
We've not
these
concentrated on that. Made really no real efforts on that.
we have not quite, focused attention on how this can be actually turned to an advantage for you. Lastly, I would say, is the question of connectivity. Now, it is still true that the subcontinent is still not as connected as it was before partition. Now, that's
What happened to SARC?
SARC,
History.
partly it is also the impact of what I mentioned about
Yes,
the domestic
yes,
politics because of Pakistan.
That's right.
But I think what we also need to see is that, one, physical connectivity, there has been progress. No doubt about that, in terms of highways, in
That's
terms
right,
of
that's
railway
right.
connections. But I always say that you may have a glass top highway connecting you with your neighboring country, and yet if at the border you still have archaic kind of procedures, and you still have many kinds of barriers.
Right.
Where are you going to get that, what you are aiming for, which is a free flow of goods, of peoples, and even ideas,
I agree.
because of that cultural
I agree.
affinity.
I agree.
So there are many things which we need to really look at in terms of our neighborhood, because I think it remains true that whatever ambitions you have to play a regional role in, say, Asia, or even a larger global role, if you can't get your neighborhood right, it will always be suboptimal.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So part of the problem I had, say, with the G20 summit, where you had a very successful initiative in calling the global South countries to get their inputs. I think won some brownie points
Yes,
with getting
of course.
African Union in. Why
And
could
you got a
not,
declaration which people were very skeptical about.
Why could you not also give a certain promise to your own neighborhood as well, as part and parcel of that? It would have made a difference.
Yes.
I think in amplification, I think if there are possible 3 points, I think, if I would add, many of them play into each other. One is, again, we've said a more robust China, etc. Now, we've never had that much Chinese activity as we have today in our neighborhood, as a direct competition. And the second point, it's not just a competition with India or Indian interests. What's happening is this is no longer a backwater as it was in the Cold War years. Today, you have the United States very much present in our neighborhood, though they tell India to take the lead. India is the lead partner, and they admitted, even yesterday there was a statement to that effect by one of their assistant secretaries. But the fact is that American interests and Chinese interests are beginning to collide here in our neighborhood, whether it's Sri Lanka, whether it's Myanmar. whether it's possibly Bangladesh,
Even Nepal.
even Nepal,
Nepal, yes.
even Nepal, and we're not even talking of Pakistan.
That's right.
So this again puts an objective sort of constraint on how much we are going to be able to do. It also should be more of a spur for us to do much more, because this is our direct, backyard is not a good word, but this is our direct zone of interest.
That's right.
Without stability here, we can't be developing.
Absolutely.
Without ensuring that our security interests are taken care of in the neighborhood, we will constantly be looking over our shoulder as to what's happening.
Right.
And there is the third factor, again, which is complicating matters, is the internal politics of most of these countries today, which is being taken advantage of by one party or the other. Myanmar is today a melting pot, and you don't know where it's going to go, what's going to happen to our projects
Sri
there.
Lanka is in economic doldrums.
Sri Lanka has gone up and down and into China's lap and now struggling to get out of. Maldives is now deep in China's lap.
That's right.
And they would rather not have 80 Indian soldiers, but would put 37% of their debt proportion goes to China.
That's right.
And we are again not even talking of Pakistan. So a lot of this puts an objective constraint. It also puts the necessity that we cannot take any of these countries for granted.
This is a very serious situation. I was just looking at in the context of domestic policy, influencing foreign policy. You take the recruitment of Gurkhas in Nepal, right? The Agniveer scheme, right, has had a very negative impact.
True.
Because there are about, I think, 30,000 Gurkhas serving in the army today, right? And there are people in Nepal living in pension who've retired, who are getting pensions from us. And suddenly you have a policy, Agniveer policy, by which that recruitment is in great jeopardy. And China has offered that let the Gurkhas come to us, offered Nepal. Australia has done the same thing. So you should have thought through your policy, this Agniveer policy, and how it's going to impact you. The camaraderie grows because of the interrelationship, right? Because Nepal has an open border. Now, that camaraderie, if you had focused on your neighborhood, you would have been able to actually secure the neighborhood in such a way. But of course, China being there, it's acting as a spoiler. This has happened even Kuwait 370. Even Kuwait 370. Actually, Kashmir it's the domestic policy of Kashmir that has resulted in the kind of things that are happening, the infiltration by Pakistan. Now, we're not willing to talk to Pakistan. In any case, there's no point talking to Pakistan today, considering the situation that it is in. I don't think it'll be able to get out of the mire that it has got itself into. Similarly, Chinese investment in Hanban-Tota, right? And all those things have muddied the waters. Now, we need to focus on our neighborhood. And that's what's coming out of this discussion.
Yes. So, to be fair, say Sri Lanka, I was encouraged by the fact that when Sri Lanka went into this deep economic crisis, and in fact, China was shown up as not being really ready to help in the manner that was expected by the Sri Lankan government. India was very quick off the mark.
$4 billion form.
Yes. So we I think took advantage. Again, we were talking about how you you should look at what possibilities come up.
Right.
And I think when this possibility came up to salvage some of our we were able to do that. We were able to do that. So I was just a couple of months ago, I was in Sri Lanka, and I was struck by the very significant change in sentiment.
That's right.
With regard to India.
Right.
Now, of course, you have to take that forward. But there is no doubt that there is now a certain wariness about engagement with China, which was not the case. If you recall, when China announced its Belt and Road Initiative, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor was its flagship project.
That's correct. Now it's
Have you heard?
No, not at all. You're
No.
right. You're right. It's,
Part of the backlash which you see, because I think the Pakistanis have been very disappointed
Yes.
that in this economic crisis, the kind of helping hand which they had expected from their
China.
iron brother simply did not materialize. you know.
But we should take advantage of this.
Right. So this is what I'm trying to point out, that with respect to even our neighborhood, there are opportunities which have opened up because of other circumstances, because China itself is facing difficulty. Take, for example, Nepal. Nepal very shrewdly has told China, yes, you want to do these various large-scale ambitious projects, but you have to do them on grant.
That's right.
They are.
They realize the experience with other countries.
Exactly. So I think there are also opportunities in our neighborhood where we can actually advance
I agree.
And there's a practical demonstration of the change in sentiment in Sri Lanka. They've put a 1-year moratorium on visit of research ships, or in other words, spy ships, essentially because we were not happy with the Chinese ships visiting Colombo and Hermantota. And similarly, I think if the other sort of good patch of news is the fact that in Bangladesh, I think except for the Tista River issue, we have actually got through a lot of major problems, and connectivity, things are being inaugurated almost as we speak. So I think that is again a good story.
Yeah, but I think Bangladesh, I think we have to take this forward.
Again, the domestic politics.
Or domestic politics is having an impact.
It is having an impact. But I
the
think
fencing, the migration, all that is
But I think what you have to keep in mind is that whatever short-term opportunities emerge in your relationship with, say, your neighbors, you should utilize that opportunity to put into place longer-term assets.
That's right. I agree.
So
with that.
once you put in those longer-term assets, take for example with Bhutan. Now the hydroelectric power relationship between the two countries is so important, is so significant, that even if there are certain political changes, that provides a degree
But Shyam Saran, that happens even with Nepal, because
True.
same thing with Nepal.
Yeah, these are vested interests are created.
Yes,
So-
and with Bangladesh today, you'd be surprised that India is today one of the largest suppliers of power
That's right.
to Bangladesh.
That's right.
Its entire industry,
So that's what must move
Right.
forward from a long-term standpoint.
long-term
as you rightly
standpoint,
said.
I think this is the kind of strategy you need to have.
Let's now move away from our neighborhood and look at the US and look at what's happening in the Indo-Pacific area, especially the challenges that are lying ahead. The US recently, along with South Korea and Japan, have entered into a military alliance, which I think is very significant given the hostility between Japan and South Korea because of the occupation from 1910 to 1945. So you have that happening. You have the AUKUS happening, where the Australia and the US and the UK are getting together for Australian manufacturing nuclear submarines to meet the challenges. You have the Quad, in which we are a significant partner. But my question is, when it comes to the crunch, are they going to help us big time?
Do you want me to
You can start. You can start, or anybody.
I think I would say without any reservation that if you expect that any of your partners with whom you have strong strategic convergence will actually come and fight your wars, they will not
That's
happen.
right. So
I think that we should be absolutely
Clear
clear
about
about. Short of that, are they in a position to assist you to build up your capabilities? Because that is what you need.
they may be in a position, are they willing and going out of the way to do that?
That is an evolving relationship.
Right.
Why do I say that? Because when I was Foreign Secretary, even getting that first foundational agreement between the two sides, which was a very, very difficult task. Today, all
of them?
Yes.
our foundational agreements have been done.
That's true.
The level of, I think, engagement between the security establishment, defense establishment of the US and of India. If you had asked me at the time when I was Foreign Secretary whether India-US relations will reach this level,
you couldn't have. You couldn't
I
have.
would not have. I would have said this is not possible.
That's true.
But that has happened. So what is it? What is it that you should be doing? You should take advantage of the current preoccupation that the United States has with a certain global challenge it is confronting, to try and leverage that.
That's right.
Or to build up your own capabilities.
Correct.
You should not depend upon the US to bail you out in meeting your threat, but you should use this. How can I, over a period of time, really build up my economic capabilities, my technological capabilities, military capabilities? After all, isn't this what China did?
No, but
1971.
China's strategy was somewhat different.
Well, it was.
We can't
perhaps,
replicate that strategy.
Maybe not.
Oh, yes.
But the basic principle, China leveraged the US preoccupation with the Soviet threat at that time to really get the US to build up its own capabilities. So I think you are also in that, in a somewhat different context, you are in that position. So to expect that the US or any of your partners will fight side by side with you in a war with any adversary, that will not happen.
No, I'm not talking about war at the moment. Navtej, I'll take this forward later.
No, I think when you're talking of the Indo-Pacific, I think it's not simply a question of ganging up against China, to put it brutally, because even on that aspect, we certainly have two challenges. We have a maritime challenge with China, and we have a continental challenge with China. Now, on the continental challenge, nobody's going to come and fight our battle. We have to do it ourselves. Yes, if we have built up enough trust, if we have built up enough cooperation through our maritime cooperation, through our cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, you will find much more cooperation in terms of building up opinion, in terms of intelligence sharing, in terms of putting political pressure and diplomatic pressure where needed, which may help us in other fields. In that, I think we have done over the last 10 years, 2008 onwards actually, where our defense purchases were virtually zero from the United States, we've reached more than $20 billion. And as Ambassador Shyam Saran said, all the foundational agreements have been done. We are regularly exercising with the United States, one of the largest exercises, highly specialized exercises. But I think the second aspect beyond this, beyond pure security, is the fact that the Indo-Pacific has become the focus of world activity now and in the coming future. Whether you see it in terms of trade, whether you see it in terms of energy, you see it in terms of digital connectivities. So that and other areas of cooperation, the emerging technologies. I mean, the technology centers are moving here. There's Taiwan, Japan, South Korea.
Correct.
So whether you see only the chip industry, I mean, the biggest chip industry in the world is in Taiwan, followed now by Japan and Korea and
we are still struggling together.
They are still struggling. So the Indo-Pacific cooperation, the Quad, for instance, has several legs. And of course, the biggest is this, strategic convergence on China, which we don't talk too much about. But there are all these other things. So which is, again, we have a window here.
From a security standpoint, yes.
Yes.
But the question is, ultimately, and I started the conversation by asking that question.
Will they help us?
Will they help us? Number one. Number two, we have to become a major economic power, right? Now, what steps are we taking to become that major economic power? You know very well that China spends over $560 billion in research.
R&D.
In R&D alone every year. The US spends over $640 billion in R&D, right? Our spend is about $45 billion. Now, unless you produce IT, that's how you're going to become rich. And you talked about, China taking advantage of the situation. problem here is the Western world is moving towards artificial intelligence. And with 1.4 billion people in our country, if you use artificial intelligence in a big way, which will be done because industry cannot help it, what happens to the people who are crying for jobs? So the economic model of India should be different to make it a superpower. And no cooperation as the West is going to allow you to let that happen, right? Unless you have a model on the basis of which you move forward. Because artificial intelligence, industry will have to adopt. So where do we go from here? And that's the big question that I have.
I think I would say that there are different dimensions to this economic advancement or technological advancement which we see. Because if you look at some aspects of that technology, digital technology, actually India has used it to, in a sense, leapfrog in some areas of fintech, for example.
Yes.
And that also has helped in terms of distributing benefits to a larger population.
The service sector.
It has helped. So it is not that if we go in for this technology, it is necessarily going to worsen our employment problem. It may, in some ways, also help by making a bigger cake possible. So it is something that we have to, as you said, we have to examine very carefully. The other aspect is that the creamy layer argument that you are giving is absolutely right. So even if we are looking at, say, the startup space, very dynamic,
but very difficult times.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is a very mixed kind of picture. But the consolation is that this mixed picture is being faced by everybody. Yes. It's not that, but it is also giving you, I think, an opportunity for possible, leapfrogging. We have done that in some segments, as you've seen. You are also associated with the whole idea of, how do we make sure that we adopt a policy framework which is not so much focused on revenue, but it is focused on how do I expand.
Exactly.
And it was eminently successful.
That's right.
So I think there are examples within our own country which gives you the possibility of looking at what are the possible areas in which this kind of a technological capability can actually open up much more opportunities for you. Because basic ingredients are there. You, after all, have a very, very sophisticated scientific and technological manpower available. After all, that is why so many of the major companies are opening their research laboratories here.
Absolutely.
So I think the basic potential is there. Unfortunately, we have to keep going back to the word potential, but it is there. So I would say that I do not think that we should be somewhat inhibited in really going full scale ahead with respect to
no, we have to. We have no choice.
And with regard to artificial intelligence, you might have seen a report today in the newspaper where several of the younger startup people are saying, you are bringing in regulations which may very well support the bigger players,
That's right,
but what about us?
Us, correct, absolutely. This morning,
you might.
I saw it.
So those are complicated policy issues. You should not get into a situation where you actually, shrink the space for that kind of innovation.
But artificial intelligence is going to help, and you're right, the service sector big time. And it's huge growth possibilities there. Right, but that's not going to transform the economy of India. I fear you need much more than that, is what I'm saying.
I am somewhat more optimistic on that count, because even with respect to manufacturing, you see in many parts of the world how artificial intelligence is actually leading to much more sophisticated manufacture, of course, but also making possible a scale that was not.
Sorry, Navtej, I'm going to take.
Please.
An issue with him on that.
I'm willing to listen avidly.
Yeah, the reason why I'm saying is that unless you invest in education, unless you invest in skills
This
of
is the
that
point.
nature, you're not going to reach
I
there.
agree. I agree.
Right?
STEM in India is
Yes, you
rather
see,
depressing.
that's
at this
not
point.
happening if you see our budgets on education.
I concede that. I concede that.
And that's the point I was making.
I think that is probably one of the biggest challenges.
Yes.
Reason why I say this is that if you look at the Chinese experience, they lost a whole generation during the Cultural Revolution. What was the first important decision taken by
Education.
themselves? Education.
That's right.
You know, it was
And
the
10
Chinese,
10 years, we have not done anything for education.
Yes, I think I do agree that you have to put in much more of an effort in that direction. I take perhaps some encouragement from the fact that a large part of that very top level, scientific and technological capability is lying outside.
Yeah, that's the problem. That's the problem.
If you are able to,
there's another issue. If you don't give freedom to educational institutions, don't give them, play in the joints, you're not going to. This is not going to happen. This is a big issue in this country.
Universities must always remain spaces for freedom of expression and freedom of.
No, I think what you were talking about artificial intelligence and return to education, I think it's deeply linked.
Yes.
Because artificial intelligence is going to be based on this entire idea of greater computing, quantum computing, larger
Machine learning.
Yes, and the United States, for instance, is now moving towards manufacturing of chips, which they have neglected for the last 50 years because they were designing, they're the top designers, they're everything else, except they're not manufacturing. And even there in the United States, they are in desperate need for thousands of people who are going to be able to work on that manufacturing, and they are not going to be available in the United States.
That's right.
So again, we can fit it. We can't set up that manufacturing. We are planning to set up
the IT will belong to them.
Some low,
IT will belong to them. The intellectual property will belong
yes,
to them.
yes. But we are. This is a way of getting into the value chain of artificial intelligence. We are going to set up I believe, a packaging and a testing factory, which is right at the lower end of the value chain. We cannot move straight into the manufacturing. But the training of people,
Yes.
and they permanently don't have to go and stay in the United States. As you've seen, there is a lot of mobility. But this is going to be the strength of India.
No.
If we can do it.
If we can do it.
If we can do it.
So actually, there are so much more to talk about. Foreign policy is such a vast subject. We have touched, I think, on some major issues, and we're going to leave, another time for another discussion to take this forward. But thank you very much for being here.
Pleasure.
It's been very kind of you.
Thank
You to get two minds together, and to have a full free flow discussion is a great opportunity for me.
Thank you very much.
Likewise for us.
Thank you for getting us here.
Thank you.